welcome to A Year of Career, 52 Practical Answers to Your Questions. I'm Erin Wolfram. I own and operate Career Advantage and Career Advantage Golf, and I help people all over the world feel more confident and prepared throughout their job search by helping with resumes, cover letters, LinkedIn profiles, mock interviews. I also do websites and portfolios, so really just anything job search related. But each week on this podcast, I answer one question from the public. And this week's question is, when is it too late to make a career change? And honestly, I don't think there's really a way to answer that question, with a definitive answer. So luckily, I have two guests with me today who are going to share their stories. Both of them changed careers, I believe, in their 30s. And so they're going to talk about, their different situations, what prompted them to do that, and give you all a little bit of advice in case you are considering a career change. So with us today, we have Ellen and Brent Lind. And Ellen and I used to be colleagues at the University Career Center, so she does have a little bit of a career services background. But Ellen, would you go ahead and just introduce yourself?
Sure, yeah. So my name is Ellen Lind, and as Erin mentioned, I used to work with Erin. I still work at the University Career Center, but we used to work together there, and that's how we met. And I am also a musician, so I did my undergrad degree is in cello performance, and then so after my degree, I spent um, many years, 10 years or so, essentially being a freelance musician and teaching lessons, playing with orchestras. I did a stint on cruise ships. I did some work with rock bands, which is actually where I met Brent. And yeah, and then about 3 years ago or so, I was working at the Career Center in a part-time capacity, sort of as like a day job. And then I started thinking about, just kind of wanting to have a little bit more stability in my life. I love music, I love the cello, but it sometimes it's hard to pay the bills with that. And so yeah, I ended up starting to take some classes and ended up pursuing music therapy, which I'm actually still in the process of pursuing my credentials in music therapy from KU. I'm getting ready to start an internship actually in the Chicago area this summer.
Wow.
And yeah, so a lot of big changes. It's been a real journey and a process, but yeah, that's a little bit about me.
Great. And we're going to hear much more about that journey and process here in just a minute. So thank you so much. All right, Brent, how about you? Who are you? Why are you here?
Well, I'm Brent Lynn, and I work at the Lawrence Arts Center here in town, which is a really, I guess, since we have a non-local audience, I should say that the Lawrence Arts Center does arts education. We host galleries, we host a performing arts program. It's a really neat community resource, and so I work there as a Salesforce developer and administrator, which is definitely a new career for me in the last few years. Before that, I studied theater lighting design here at the University of Kansas and pursued a career in the entertainment world. And so I spent basically 15 years traveling with bands, working as an audio professional. And that was a really wild ride and really exciting and fun. But I kind of hit a wall in my mid 30s where it just didn't seem as challenging anymore, and I was a little tired of living out of a suitcase. I mean, the travel is amazing, and I wouldn't trade those experiences for anything. But eventually, I was like, I kind of want to be at home with my wife and our dogs, and I would love to have hobbies and things. And so, so I started looking for a way to transition out of that world, and it was tough because you have this really refined skill set, and I couldn't find really much else that it would translate to that would be local and a more normal kind of lifestyle. So basically, I started doing freelance web development on the side, and that kind of led me through a not straight path to where I am today. I guess that's a little intro.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Well, you already have kind of started talking about, why you made changes and things like that. So, Ellen, let's get back to you for a minute. So, you said that you, were a musician and you did some teaching and things like that. And then you ended up at the University Career Center. So let's kind of talk about that transition first. If you want to dive a
Mhm.
little bit more into kind of how you went from, that I know life as a musician, life as a
Mhm.
music teacher, sort of owning your own business, running your own business to career services.
Yes. Yeah. Um, it's a great question. So I got to a point, this was probably in my early 30s, I would say, where I in a lot of ways I loved what I was doing, and I had a pretty full teaching studio. I was teaching, about, I don't know, 3 hours a day or so, most days, and then I was freelancing, doing some like subbing with the Kansas City Symphony, and I was playing with the Topeka Symphony, and then I had also, and I still have, this business where I contract musicians for weddings and events, and so I was keeping really busy, and I was, and the other thing about being a professional musician is you have to practice a lot. Like, most days I would practice at least 2-3 hours a day. So that's like on top of all the other stuff. So I was at this point where I felt like my days were super long. I was really like working hard, but I was looking at my, sort of my annual income, and I was like, this is not adding up. It's like I don't have, I was having to buy health insurance. Both Brent and I were on the open market, and it was
Yes,
super expensive, right?
so expensive.
And yeah, and then it was also like this feeling of just like, it was just, I was never able to make enough to where I felt like comfortable, or I felt like I was making what I wanted to be making, considering how much work I was doing. So, yeah, so then I started just kind of trying to explore my options, honestly, doing a lot of the stuff that at the Career Center, like we encourage students to do. I did some volunteering at like audio reader. I started just trying to talk to people and figure out like what is a good way that I could maybe make a change. I started really thinking like maybe I need to make a career change, but I wasn't sure what that would look like. And then so I just started keeping an eye on the job postings and stuff at KU, and this job opened up at the Career Center. I think it was initially like an events coordinator job that I applied for. And I didn't get an interview or anything like that, but I did submit an application. And then, like maybe 4 or 5 months after that, I got an email from David Gaston, and he said, "Hey, you applied for this position a little while back. A similar position has opened up. Would you be interested in interviewing?" And I was like, "Yeah, sure." So I ended up interviewing for a position that was recently created. It was like a communications assistant position, part-time. And yeah, and I remember doing the interview. I remember you were there at the
Yep, I
interview.
was saying, fun fact, I interviewed
Yeah.
Ellen and played a role in hiring her.
And yeah, and I just remember during that interview that it was like this really great, it felt to me like a conversation, and it felt like it started to kind of get my wheels turning about just potential future options. And I started thinking about, oh, like maybe career coaching is something I could do, or but I was just really excited about the idea of just trying something new. And also the wonderful thing about working at the university is that, I, even for working part-time, I was able to get benefits for Brent and I, and was able to experience things like paid time off, and like things I had never before
Concept.
that experienced. And yeah, so so yeah, it started essentially as kind of like a day job for me, and just a way to kind of start to explore some different options, and also to have a little bit more stability in terms of like income, and have benefits and stuff like that.
Absolutely. And I remember, that was quite a few years ago now, but I remember that, one of the things that we saw in your application and in your interview were those transferable skills that you have. It's not that your resume indicated that you had the exact experience or the exact type of position, like we were hiring for, but we were able to really look and see that, by running your own business and doing all the organization and the coordination that you had to do, with vendors and your musicians and things like that, that we could really see that you had the transferable skills that we needed, and that would allow you to be successful in that position. And I think that that's so important for people to really know what their transferable skills are and know how to demonstrate those to future employers. And that's something that you did really well. And I'm guessing, Brent, that kind of is a nice transition to your story, because you obviously had to use, transferable skills as well to get from what you were doing to what you're doing now. So do you want to just kind of talk a little bit more about that? I know you did a little bit already in your introduction, but if you want to kind of expand a little bit, that would be great.
Well, yeah, I think, you put it in a really interesting way. It is something I've thought about, because I think that years ago when I would think, what's next? How am I going to get off the road? What's my next career move? It's really daunting in your mind, because you just think like, well, I've got to go get a master's degree or something. And
Right.
I mean, I would think those things. And I think what I've learned over this kind of journey is that, as you put it, you have transferable skills, and it's kind of about separating the core skills from the context, I think, is a really important thing. Like another way of putting that is, like, I think I've learned a lot about the kinds of work that speaks to me and that I work well in. And the context isn't always the most important thing. Like in my old job as an audio engineer, you're working with all this technology, helping artists express themselves. I would say that's exactly what I'm doing today at the Lawrence Arts Center. Instead of an audio mixing console, it's the Salesforce platform. But at the end of the day, what works well for me is using technology to problem solve and find new solutions. That's what I'm good at, and that's what I enjoy doing. I have tried other things, like in the music career. Occasionally, I would dabble in tour management or production management, and that was always a situation where I found, not that I failed miserably, but boy, did I not enjoy it. It was just like, this does not speak to me. This is not my wheelhouse. And so I think it's important, as you go through career experiences and stuff, to try to figure out on that really fundamental level, like what are the things you enjoy,
Right.
and try to pull that out of the context of the field that you're talking about. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that, a couple things that I picked up on there is, one, like you said, really figuring out what it is that you enjoy doing, and also the type of environment, right, that you like doing that in. But also you said that you were able to identify your strengths as well. And I think that that's so important. And so not only identifying those transferable skills, identifying those strengths, and identifying, where you want to utilize those skills and strengths, so you will enjoy your job, right? I mean, you're there minimum 40 hours a week. You probably should like it, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's so important.
And too, I think part of that, I think that I used to see that in a more superficial light of, oh, I would love to work at a company that does X, and things like that. And I think that what I've learned for me is that it's not, I mean, that matters. I do care about, the thing we're producing or whatever, but I think that on a deeper level, it's kind of about the kinds of tasks that you're doing, and like you said, environment's a big part of that too. So,
Absolutely.
woke
No,
up.
I agree. We'll hear from Jake next, the dog, and get his life
Jake's
story.
He is deep in a career of lounging and chewing, and he excels at it.
Sounds pretty great to me. All right, well, let's talk a little bit more then about challenges. So Ellen, we'll start with you again, and maybe, thinking more in terms of now your next step, so I'm sure
Mm-hmm.
you had a few challenges transitioning initially, but now you're in a way transitioning again, into
Mm-hmm.
a new career path. So I guess just in general, over the course of your career trajectory, what are some challenges that you've encountered?
Yeah, yeah. That's a great question. I think, for me, and I know that this is probably something Brent can relate to because we've talked about this a lot, but one of the biggest challenges, honestly, was the question of identity. And I know that for me as a musician, I mean, back when I was, out of school and I was doing the freelance thing, I mean, I really, really strongly identified as a musician, a cellist. I would like introduce myself that way. And I would, it was just something that I was like living and breathing so intensely for such a long time, um, that when I started to begin this transition, that was just something that I, found really difficult. And it was something that took, honestly, probably a couple of years for me to come to terms with the fact that I was going to no longer, it's not that I'm not a musician anymore. I mean, I still am. I still do a little bit of teaching. I still play some gigs. And then, of course, I'm using my musical training so much in my new field of music
Right.
therapy. But yeah, just to go from completely identifying as this one thing to then switching that around, it can really, I mean, I think it's like your ego can take a big hit. And
Sure.
another aspect of that, and again, I think this is something Brent has also experienced, is that it's like you go from, you've spent all this time learning this one craft, right? This one thing or a particular skill, getting into a particular field. And then at the point where you decide to make this change and you begin the process, it's like all of a sudden you're just new at everything again. And you're no
Right.
longer considered an expert. You're no longer looked at in that way, or you don't look at yourself in that way. And that can also be just really, really hard to kind of come to terms with that and to be okay with sort of being a beginner again.
I completely understand. I worked at the University Career Center for 13 years, and then and at that point I felt like, I was one of the people who had worked there the longest, so I kind of knew a lot of the answers to the questions that people had, and I was doing a lot of the training when we had new people come on board. And I just felt really confident in what I was doing and what I was supposed to be doing. And then I took a new position somewhere else. And at that point, I was the new person and I didn't know anything. And it was really
Mm-hmm.
scary and really hard for me because I had been in, more of a leadership like position, and going
Mm-hmm.
from that to, the person who knows nothing, it was very hard for me. So I completely understand.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
How about you, Brent? What are some
Oh boy.
challenges that you have
Well,
seen or
well, I would
experienced?
100% echo that same sentiment. I mean, I really struggled with that. And honestly, I still have those feelings sometimes in that, I had this thing that I had put in my 10,000 hours plus and, I would never say I mastered anything, but I was good at it. And that definitely gets wrapped up in your identity. And so the thought of having to start over and be the new guy somewhere is rough. That gets right to your ego. And you mentioned in the question of timing and when is it a bad time to make a career change. And I don't think there's a bad time to make a career change,
Right.
but I would say that a feeling that spurred me on was as I was nervous about that loss of identity and everything. I also would always think it's only going to get harder, the older I get. And I did have peers that were 15, 20 years older than me that probably were ready to move on, but I think it was more intimidating to them. And so, for me, I think that ultimately the answer to that question was sooner than later. The other thing I wanted to add to that conversation is another challenge that I experienced making a big career transition was vastly different cultures,
Mm,
from one workplace to another.
yes.
And,
Yes.
for me, obviously the touring world is a little bit Peter Panish, and, it's a world where like you live with the people that you work with, and so you sort of have to deal with your issues, and so it's kind of common to like hash it out. Like, I'm not talking about fighting with people, but if you have a disagreement with someone, it's like just get it out of the open, and maybe you go outside and you yell at each other for 5 minutes, and then you hug it out, and it's all good. And in the business world, like that's generally not how things are done. And so, I had to learn kind of some new skill sets there in terms of maybe a more adult way of dealing with conflict and things like that. So that was a factor.
Absolutely. And culture is so hard. I mean, you can interview, you can do your research, you can ask all the right questions, but ultimately you never know what the culture is going to be until you actually get in there and immerse yourself into it. So, that's a challenge, no matter whether you're actually transitioning to a new career or just a new job in the same type of career industry. Culture is so hard to figure out for sure. Well, last question, and Brent, maybe we'll make you go first this time, since I've been putting Ellen on the spot the whole time. But, as we wrap up and you think about the conversation that we've had today, so what advice would you give someone who is thinking about maybe making a career transition?
I would say don't be scared. Don't jump right in, and leverage whatever you've got. And don't be afraid to go do things for free on your own, like just to get experience. I think you have to invest in yourself and have a little confidence and be ready to jump off the cliff a little bit and see what happens. So maybe that was a long way of saying don't be afraid to take a risk. So
No, I think
'cause
that's
I'll
great
say
advice.
this: I took a big pay cut and gave up the thing that I had all this skill in, and I've never been happier. There's a lot of things in life that contribute to happiness, and a paycheck is just one of them. So, yes.
No, that's so important, because I think a lot of times people just see that number, right? They see that salary, that wage, and that's really all they can think about. But there are so many other things, work-life balance, benefits that you all have mentioned before, things like that. So, and happiness it's so important. So,
Yeah.
Ellen, what about you? Any different
Yeah.
advice?
I think Brent's advice is great, and I would add to that, doing a lot of talking to people, and sort of doing research is, I think, a great way to begin the process. If you are in a state where you're considering a career change, trying to just connect with people that are in the field that you're looking at, or in a similar situation, and having conversations with them about it can be really eye-opening. It can also be a great way to network and to meet new people. So yeah, I think just trying to keep a really open mind and learn as much as you can about what it is that you're interested in before you maybe take that big jump, whether that's quitting an existing job or starting a new degree program. Just trying to kind of like do your homework, I think, in the way of talking to as many people as you can, I think is a great thing to do as you're thinking about that.
Absolutely. I've talked about that a few times in this podcast, reaching out to your network and trying to conduct informational interviews to gather that information that you need to make informed decisions. So such fantastic advice. This has been so great. Wonderful stories, wonderful information. I really appreciate you being here today. So thank you so much. We're going to go ahead and wrap up today. If you would like any additional information, if you're a KU student, or an alum, you can always check out Ellen at the University Career Center and the rest of the great staff there. I highly recommend them. But if you need additional career support, you can always check me out at careeradvantageresumes.com or careeradvantagegolf.com. I'm also on social media at Career Advantage Resumes on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn, and Twitter on at Advantage Career. So thank you so much for joining us today. I hope everyone has a great rest of the day, and hopefully we'll see you next week.